My guest this week is Martin Wong. Martin contributed to punk zines like FLIPSIDE and Fear of Grown-Ups before editing all 68 issues of Giant Robot, which applied the DIY subculture mentality to Asian and Asian American culture from 1994 to 2011, way before manga was at the library or BTS was playing stadiums in the US. In 2000, he met his wife Wendy Lau when she became graphic designer of the mag. And after Giant Robot ran its course, they went on to start the Save Music in Chinatown DIY matinee shows, inspired by the historic LA neighborhood's punk past, to support the local elementary school's music program, mixing first-generation punkers such as Alice Bagg, Mike Watt, Frank, Adolescents, and Channel 3, with newer bands like Dengue Fever, Schizophonics, Neighborhood Brats, and Slaughterhouse, as well as spawning his daughter and niece's band, the Linda Lindas. Martin's most recent dream gig is shitworker for the Linda Lindas, and he still contributes to zines to this day, mostly Razor Cake. And it is my great pleasure to welcome to Revolutions Per Movie, Martin Wong. Hi, Martin.
Hey, Chris.
So good to see you. I have so much to ask you about with your life and career and current status as a shitworker. But you wrote for FLIPSIDE. What were your first punk records then? What were you listening to? What did you discover before you started writing for them?
I went to a show at the Coconut Teaser, which is like not one of the cool places, but FLIPSIDE would have like cheap shows on Sundays with free buffets. It's almost like going to a strip club or something, I would guess, but you'd see, Arthur Lee playing or who, like in this case, it was Joy Aoki's birthday. And she, writer, graphic designer, she designed the Epitaph logo and tons of early Bad Religion and Doggy Style records. And that night she became a friend. I attended her birthday party and Bad Religion and Green Day played. And L7 too, I think. If you
Naturally.
look at the, So like, I think she was wearing like a LA Kings jersey and I struck up a conversation. I'm like, oh yeah, cool. And then she's like, oh, then we started talking about Star Trek and whatever. And she found out that I was an English major and she's like, oh, you should write for FLIPSIDE.
Amazing.
So I wrote a couple reviews, and I think I wrote stuff about like, there was a Rage Against the Machine and Fishbone show at Raji's I reviewed. I wrote an article about Down by Law, which just started. It was Dave Smalley with guys from the Chemical People who I kind of knew. So those were my first zine contributions. And then I wrote for this magazine called Dirt, which was like sassy for boys.
I don't remember that.
But Spike Jones was one of the editors.
Okay.
Mike Lumen and a bunch of like skate and I don't know, Beastie Boys type people were involved. So I remember I wrote a couple things for them, but most importantly, I contributed to the zine called Fear of Grown-Ups, which my friend Craig Edelman put together. And that was like a Jabberjaw focused zine.
Oh, wow.
And,
yeah.
And free shows at like the Coop, the pizza place at UCLA, which would have things like Chumbawamba and Jawbreaker and Bikini Kill and Brawlin's Band and, just tons of cool bands that we would get to see as part of our education, back then. That must have been like when college rock was an actual thing.
Absolutely. It comes up quite a bit. Like when did it become not the underground, but it became like alternative, and even like what was independent, it's just very confusing, but it's amazing how many people have had on the show. It is proximity. It was just standing next to someone and starting up a conversation with someone, being like, I thought Die Kreuzen were good, but other people were spitting on them because they were kind of gothy now. And then you're like, and then you go and you talk and it's just all of a sudden you're in a band together. I just love that.
Yeah. And in my case, I didn't form a band, but I started writing for zines.
Right.
And then out of Fear of Grown-Ups, the Giant Robot zine kind of grew out of that because my friend Eric was another guy that he was like the other Asian dude at all these punk shows or DIY punk shows at Jabberjaw and Macondo and the Coop. And, he would take pictures for like, I don't know, the Muffs and Red Cross. You'd see his photography on their stuff.
Oh, incredible.
And I was writing for, FLIPSIDE and whatever. So like, it was kind of like I had a day job editing textbooks and he worked at a photo lab. So it was like, it was like Voltron. We each had complementary sides of the robot to put together. When he said, "Oh, I want to make a zine, but about Asian stuff," and I'm like, "Yeah, me too." So yeah, Giant Robot was born.
Such an amazing period. Like I just remember for pop culture, you know, you'd get your Sub Pop singles in the mail, single of the
Yeah,
month. You would, you know, get Joe Sacco's Yahoo or, you know, something from Drawn and Quarterly. And then all of a sudden, these amazing magazines were just starting to pop up, including Giant Robot. It just felt so perfect and timely. But when you were starting those first couple issues that, you know, didn't reach to Portland, Oregon, how were you putting those together? Was it just pen and ink and cut and paste and letter set, or what were you
yeah,
doing?
they were literally glued and stapled and folded. We'd walk around Eric's dining table,
Mm-hmm.
collating, stapling, and folding, and then we'd hand deliver them to places like Jabberjaw was a big deal when that was under glass.
Mm-hmm.
There were some cool comic book stores like Meltdown and Golden Apple that we would hand deliver to. I remember taking it to Top Shelf Records on Hillhurst, which is kind of like where Grand Royal was sort of based there.
Okay.
Yeah, we took it everywhere, by hand, and that was enough. Like we were just happy to do that. And Eric is kind of an entrepreneurial guy because he grew up going, his family had a restaurant. His dad was a contractor, so he was kind of a business dude, and I was just kind of into writing and editing. So it kind of worked out that he was growing the empire. Meanwhile, I just wanted to make a zine. Um, yeah, and it grew.
It did. I mean, it's amazing. You have this near 500-page book from Drawn and Quarterly compiling much of the pages from the, you know, 68 magazines you made. But like when you
Yeah.
had to do that transition from, you know, just a couple people around a table making what you want. I think he even saw some footage of there's an issue where there's just some blank pages accidentally got put in, you know,
Yeah,
and then all of a
yeah.
sudden being like, oh, we're dealing with advertisers and we're going into color and the scope is getting bigger. Was that enjoyable? Did that feel like a natural progression or did it feel like intense?
Well, the core was always the same. It's never like we had a ton of people. We never moved into a big office. We always, we just went from Eric's bedroom to his garage, basically. And it was the same, 4 or 5 people. We never had more than that ever. And I I guess that's one of the cool things about your podcast that I realized, like, oh man, you're into movies and music and this, because most scenes are just about music, or it might just be about movies, or it might just be about, art, or, whatever. But to mix things up is like the most fun thing in the world. You
Absolutely.
turn people on to, maybe they're just into music, but you'll get them into movies or vice versa.
Yeah, and they're closer together than you think. I mean, it's fun to have a vantage point on all these different types of art. And the one thing that was amazing about Giant Robot was so much of it I knew nothing about. I did not have access to discovering. I mean, were there things that you had heard about that you were hard to track down and get information about? What was your process like in terms of finding either artwork or musicians or filmmakers to, you know, just turn people on to?
It was like a fanzine. So you just write about stuff that you're into. And being in LA, there's tons of film festivals, bands are always coming through, authors are doing talks. Um, Food wasn't even a thing yet. There was no such
Yes,
thing as foodies then, but we had it all.
you did.
Yeah, we just had this collector's mentality also that I built since I was a little kid reading comic books. So, I would just so for Linda, 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 for example, this movie that we'll talk about, we got a review CD DVD in the mail from Viz,
Oh, wow.
and I still have it. I keep everything. And then from that, I got obsessed, right? So I found, oh, I realized there's a soundtrack, and then it has like James Eha did the soundtrack, the guy from Smashing Pumpkins, and we never interviewed Smashing Pumpkins, but I interviewed him just for this. Um, yeah, so in this issue, we interviewed James Eha just about like soundtrack work on this obscure Japanese movie that no one will ever see. And then I found this CD, which is like Korean, and it's the band, with Bae singing. But I think like not only are there the Japanese versions, but there's like a Korean version too.
Yeah, you sent me down a rabbit hole too. Once I had not heard of this film, and it's from 2005. And even at the when I had the video store, I started in '96, and I would have to
Yeah,
go to a place called Asia TV in Portland and buy the films came in two VHS tapes. It was like you have the part
right.
one of this John Woo movie, and then you have to buy the other
Yeah,
tape to finish it.
yeah.
And I remember when I opened, I was like, do I rent these separately? That seems uncool, but that's how this place was. That's just how the culture was. And but I just tried to devour everything I could find there. And it was really such an innocent time where I remember rep houses were just starting to show, like John Woo and Jackie Chan and Sammo
Right.
Hung and all this stuff. And you're just starting to put the pieces together, but it was still quite hard to find.
Oh, it was so exciting because like when the magazine started, 94, I was so into Hong Kong movies. It was still like the golden age where John Woo, Choi Hawk, Wong Kar-wai, they were all coming out with this incredible
Yeah.
stuff. Maggie and Jackie and Chow Yun-fat and
Yep.
Leon, they were all everywhere, right? So we were there for that. But then we were there for like when Japanese movies kind of had this resurgence with Takashi Miike and Beat Takeshi
Oh my
and
God. Yes.
all them. And then we were there for like, Korean movies when Bong Joon-ho and Park, Chan-wook and all these guys. And this movie, Linda, 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 is kind of like that cool moment where things started to mishmash and like it kind of became Pan-Asian because it's like a cool Japanese movie, but it has Bae Doona, who was in Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, who I was very
Yes.
familiar with. And then she would go on to be in The Host. So
And Cloud Atlas.
yeah. So it's like that perfect moment where like all these things were changing and it was so excited. And punk rock is involved
Yes.
on top of that.
Well, before we get to the movie, I got to ask you about your work as a shit worker for
Sure.
the Linda Lindas. I'm sure most people listening are very aware of the band now. It's a family affair. Can you put together the map and the history of that band?
After Giant Robot ran its course, Wendy and I kind of, I was like, whoa, what do I do now? Like,
Mhm.
that was my identity, making the scene. And Eric had the shop and gallery, which is cool. But I was like kind of adrift. I'm like, well, now what? Right. So I kind luckily I was a spouse and a parent. So I volunteered a lot with my daughter's preschool, and I took Lucia, her older sister, a lot. Like I had to hang out with her a lot too. And we went to a lot of in stores. Like I remember we took them to see like the Dum Dum Girls at an in store and Best Coast, and I took Eloise to see Billy Bragg and Patti Smith at Amoeba. We all went to see Escapism and X Hex at the Getty. Like so
Killer.
many cool free shows, especially during the summer. And then eventually, Eloise went to a public school in Chinatown, and like the first day, we loved it. It was awesome. But we get this flyer saying, "Oh man, we need money for our music program." And I'm like, "Whoa." In China, I don't know if you know about LA Chinatown, but it's very immigrant, very English learning, a lot of POC, not even Asian, right? Like a lot of from Central America, Russia, all over the place. I'm like, man, they're not going to make money this way. And I thought, I'm not rich, but I kind of know how to. I have a DIY background, so we started putting on like these all ages shows, matinees, because LA Chinatown is where like the Hong Kong Cafe was.
Right.
Um, Black Flag and the Germs played there, and the Go Go's and Alice Bag. So I'm like, well, we'll just, we'll have my wife. It was my wife's idea, and I'm like, I don't know. And then I called my friend Gabby, who like did a lot of early Riot Girl stuff. I talked to my friend Wendy Yao, who was Emily Sassy Lime, and she kind of knew a little bit about Chinatown and who I could talk to for a location. And things came together. And like pretty soon, if you talk to enough people,
Yes.
you actually have to do it.
Yes.
That's and it happened.
That's my life. That's
Yeah, it's cool, right? Like you just hang out with all these people and you just never know. It's like Tampopo. And then
yes.
like you talk to one person who knows about a spot, one person who knows about putting on shows, one person who does sound.
Yes.
Um,
And somebody that looks good in a hat.
yeah. And the thing is that it's okay to ask bands to play for free if it's for kids and music,
Yes. Yes.
So it's not like So it's no biggie. If they say no, it's okay.
Not those mystery matinee shows I played in the 80s where it's like, this is for nuclear free Oregon. And you're like, who is that? Where did
Yeah,
the money go? Like, I'm cool for nuclear free Oregon, but it's like, what? Yeah, that
yeah.
sounds like a legitimate good cause.
Well, people love Chinatown because it looks cool. There's good food, and there's that history of punk rock. And most of the bands that I was talking to, like they kind of weren't rock stars, like to me they're rock stars, but they're just like they play for love, they play because they're in a scene. They want to help kids. So to get people like Bob Forrest and Adolescents and Channel 3 and the Gears and
Amazing.
uh, Frank, it just went on and on and on. And then Eloise and her cousins just grew up going to like these DIY shows. And I feel like there was just, it's one thing to learn about punk when you're older and get turned on to it and have an alternative and go have your mind blown, right? Because you think, oh man, there's just jocks and squares, but look at this. But
Right.
what if you just grew up thinking that's normal? Do it yourself, doing your own thing, being a weirdo. Um, and it was kind of cool, you know? And so the Linda Lindas, I think without the same music in Chinatown shows, there's no way it would have happened.
Right.
Eloise, like she went from making flyers to going on the pirate radio station to like help promote it to being a guest singer. She sang with Lois on a song
Oh,
when she
that's
came to
amazing.
play. She sang with this band, The Binges, an instrumental band that had like Stephen Perkins on drums and the Okai sisters, who are these rippers from Japan on guitar and bass. And I knew they did Paranoid. And I'm like, hey, maybe you want someone to sing it for you.
Right.
So I always sing Paranoid with them. The Neptunas, they did a instrumental version of Bloodstains. And I'm like, hey, maybe. And I knew they had guests come up and sing for them because I was a fan and I've seen them play before. And so Eloise like went up and sang Bloodstains with them. And I think that's the video that Kristen Control from the Dum Dum Girls saw.
Okay.
And when she was putting together like this kids program for for something called Girl School LA, she asked me, hey, does Eloise want to do it? And I'm like, yeah, she would do it in a second. She would be in this kid band for sure. And then I said, by the way, you should probably invite Mila and Lucia, her cousins, because they would, they just come up with songs and dances every day. That's what they do for fun. And I don't know where you're going to rehearse these things, but their dad has a studio in his backyard. So you could, teach them there. And yeah, so that project kind of came together that way. And yeah, it was super fun. The first rehearsal was terrible.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to ask about because this film kind of gets into it. And one of the reasons I really love this film, and also, have you ever seen the film We Are the Best?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah,
I love
it's
that
good.
film too because they're both these films show honestly what it's like to want to make music and not be good at it, but it doesn't matter because it's so exciting. And
Yeah,
and it most films the songs are really lame or they sound like an adult wrote it or it just when they get good it's just kind of a fake out. I think both of these films have a really great heart at showing the reality and kind of the interpersonal struggles of being in a band.
yeah.
So did your kid see this film?
Later on,
Okay, later on. Okay.
yeah. So we actually, so the first time they played together, they were terrible, and we knew that Bella, like a family friend's child, played guitar, so we asked her to be in it, and that became the Linda Lindas. Those four. Like after this project, they went on to, just keep doing it by themselves because it was fun, and they had all sorts of terrible names. I kind of like, hey, I'm turning 50. I'm gonna have like a Save Music in Chinatown show. Frank is gonna play. Chip Kinman from the Dills is gonna play with Formatic Ford, but you guys should play too. So I wanted them to play for my 50th birthday. And they didn't have a name yet. And I think on the first flyers it just said like Eloise, Bella, Lucia, Mila or something. Maybe alphabetical though, because I didn't want to be favorites. And then
Of
eventually,
course.
I'm like, hey, they had all these ideas, but this movie that from Giant Robot, I remembered it. And so like after one practice, I'm like, hey, we should watch this movie. As homework. And then they watched it. In the end, I'm like, hey, what else? The Linda Lindas is a name.
Oh, that's
And they said,
so
yeah.
great. And now it's like,
Yeah.
I have to ask, what was it like being on the side of the stage to watch them open for the Rolling Stones?
Yes.
I'm in a Rolling Stones coven. Joe Saka, who I mentioned earlier, we're in it together with some other people. Jerry Moore from the Miracle Workers,
Wow.
and we never get the shows with a good opener, ever. It's always like, oh, some like white blues slinger,
Yes.
and you're like, oh God, like why don't then I see like throughout the history of us going to see them, oh, Beck opened or the White Stripes and the Linda Lindas. I mean, what was that like?
They they came out of nowhere, right? Like I don't
No,
think
I know, I'm sure.
I mean someone maybe knew someone out there, but it's not like the band was like, "Oh, we want to open for the Stones. Please out." You know, because you would never dream. Like they're the top of the top of the top. And it's funny because, of course we were like, whoa, yes, like, yeah, they were into it instantly. Because how do you say no to the Stones, the world's greatest rock and roll band?
Yeah.
Like, who else is there, right? Paul McCartney doesn't have openers, and then there's a big drop off. There's nothing. Um, but it was funny because you think about the Stones and you think about listening to them, or at least I think about listening to them on AM radio and classic rock, and they're kind of like this institution. But man, when you see them live, they're like the real thing. You realize, oh wait, you've heard it a million times, but they're the originators. And to hear them play it live at this level with the band they've put together is like chilling. And I don't think it's until like even after they play it, I was stoked. But it wasn't until like Mick comes out and you hear Keith playing and Ronnie Wood sauntering across that you realize, whoa, this is really happening. And they're the goddamn Rolling Stones. It wasn't until then that it really sunk in, and I'm still unpacking it.
Yeah, the last show I saw was the best show I've seen them do in the times we've been seeing them. But what, you'd mentioned the goddamn Rolling Stones, but what about the goddamn Linda Lindas? I mean, what was that like to just, I mean, very few people get the opportunity to play something that's like with such an iconic legendary band in such an arena type of situation at such a young age.
It was all new. Yeah, like they'd never played a stage that big. They never played with wireless before. All that was new, but they're really fearless and just awesome. I don't know what to say. Like,
The footage was amazing that I saw, and every review I saw was just like is it Jordan Schwartz? Is that his name?
oh yeah,
From
yeah.
Jordan Schwartz is like, oh, they killed it, and it's like everyone's filming it, and I was like, sounded killer. I just wish they'd opened up when we saw them in Seattle, because that's what I'm saying is like I just
Yeah.
like we never get a band as good as them. So congratulations, that's so killer.
I saw Guns N' Roses open for them, so
See, I would take that. I would take that, but we don't even get that. I can't even. Some of the things we saw were just so forgettable. But this film from 2005, like that segue,
yeah.
Linda, Linda, Linda. Again, so it came through the giant robot offices,
Yeah.
and you're discovering it.
You've never seen it before till now.
I'd never seen it. I mean, have you found many people who've heard of this film?
No, that's why I wanted to bring it up because people need to see this movie. It's, like I said, it's this awesome moment in like Asian cinema. It's beautiful, right? Like if you think about
Yes.
a high school movie from Hollywood or wherever, fast cuts, goofy humor, everything is overacted, and this is like the opposite. Everything is understated. There's real drama, but it's all inside. Beautiful shots, just from far away.
Yeah. I wanted to get into one of the first shots of the movie where it's like a tracking shot.
Oh, in the hallway.
Yeah, her walking down the hallway and you're meeting people, but again, it's a very slow burn of a beginning of a film. You're putting together little bits of who's not getting along with who.
Yeah.
There's a band, someone has got their arm in a sling. You're like the beginning where they're filming somebody in their school uniform. It's like a school project, and she's basically saying, don't let anyone tell you to grow up. When we grow up, we're not going to stop being kids. And the film seems to just be like, in those first two sentences, kind of, that's what the film's about.
Yeah, it's so interesting because they have all these different styles and perspectives, and that like each one, they maybe I think to some viewers they're like, wow, that was a real hodgepodge of stuff or mishmash. But I love that the first one is like, from a VHS point of view of one student interviewing another, and then that tracking or that shot you're talking about, it's almost like a video game, right? Like I remember it was a big deal in was it oh man, it was in that Park Chan-wook movie where there was that long tracking shot, but it was a fight. And it was like people were saying it was like a video game,
Oh yeah,
right?
old boy.
An old boy, yeah. And then
Yeah,
they did the same thing in Daredevil, I think, later on. And this is almost like that, but in 2006. And they're like, and they're just talking and hanging out, and it
yeah.
unfolds the same way. I think there was something similar in Hard Boiled in the hospital too, though, where Tony Leung and Chow Yun-fat are like fighting too. But it's just this really cool shot. And then there's another one like of them walking across like this beautiful green, lush background. And then there's one of them walking across like the meat aisle in the supermarket with a
Yes.
pink background behind them. So it's just really inventive and interesting and just beautiful, right?
Yeah, and you're right. It is a mishmash of intrigue, drama, romance, pining for other people,
Yeah.
unrequited love, teen love thing, dream sequences that come out of nowhere that we'll talk about later. That is
Oh,
just
so good.
amazing. But I could see where somebody may not understand the pace of the film or be like, well, what is it really about?
Yeah.
But again, I don't think you necessarily need to have been a young musician to appreciate this film. I think it's about when you're doing something creative with people, there's always somebody who's more excited than somebody else, somebody who wants to do less work, somebody who's better than somebody else. There's just this kind of like there's all these personalities floating around. And this film and We Are the Best really do a good job.
Yeah. And you see the same thing like with the kids who are making crepes,
Yeah. Yeah.
or all the other projects going on, right?
It's high
The
school.
ones that are putting on the ones who are scheduling the bands. Like this is just like one facet of this huge festival that's going on. And you have to imagine that all those students have baggage and issues and all these things like they're trying to talk to their crushes before summer starts, all these things.
I really love the way they choose their new singer is going to be the next person who comes down this like alleyway is going to be our lead singer.
The frenemy kind of shows up.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
awkward.
Yeah. And they're like, that's who's going to do it.
Yeah, but that's just one thing about punk rock, right? Like it's perfect that
Yeah.
she's a Korean, Japanese is her second language. I love that she learns it in karaoke. Like how cool is that?
Yeah, it's a great scene.
She's talking to the guy at the counter and like it's so good.
He's like, you can't come in and just do karaoke. You have to buy a drink. And she's just like, I don't want to drink. I just want to sing. I get it.
Yeah.
The film, it's not like packed with dialogue. It really, there's a lot of silence and scenes aren't just like super, like you said, if this was an 80s US film or a 90s US film, it would have been like really snappy, and a much more fast paced. But I love the scene where they play her the Blue Hearts track
Right, with the headphones.
with
Yeah.
the headphones, and you just see the back of her head, and then she's like crying. I can relate to that because music still destroys me. I just wanted to know, do you remember maybe the first punk song you heard that just broke you or just changed your DNA?
I think what's funny, like I guess like London Calling, right, was like one of my first punk records. And I listened to it and I'm like, whoa, this is just rock and roll. This isn't really that fast or gnarly. But then I would listen to the words. And like Spanish Bombs, I'm like, whoa, this is really cool. And then you hear I'm Not Down. I was like, wow, this is really powerful, And so I think The Clash, like that was the first band I saw. Um, also, so it really informed like what music could be, or it could look cool and sound cool, but could also have a message,
Yeah.
or really have a purpose, like even if they're young and maybe not all political scientists or anything. Like you can
Right.
still have an opinion and try to change the world, uh, and make a difference, right? And inspire people and talk shit about other people. So I love that, and I still feel that way. It kind of affected the way I see all art from then on. You know.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. And for me, it was Buzzcocks, just those songs just emotionally destroyed me as somebody who was such a
Yes.
sad little romantic, you know, just being like, oh, wow, this amazing person across the seas is singing these just really direct, um, beautiful punk rock songs. But the most unhealthy one I ever did was on the first D. Kreuzen record. I remember Jello Biafra was hosting a radio show in Portland with Tom Pig from Poison Idea, and he's like, this is off the new Touch and Go record by D. Kreuzen. It's called Pain. And it's the first song of the second side. And I listened to that song over and over again. And it was not good for me. It was not good for my mental health, my physical health, where I was. It was so aggressive and noisy and horrible. But I just remembered I was that song for maybe a week, where I just was like, I feel lousy.
Well, one thing about the fact that Bae Doona like doesn't speak perfect Japanese, but she can still be the singer, or that a guy like me who I don't make music in any way, but I made a zine, and yet somehow I was able to become friends with Tony Adolescent or Keith Morris or whoever. I think only in a punk rock where can there actually is that sort of level thing. Like it sounds really phony, that thing about audience and performer and a scene, but just the fact that it's kind of for a scene. And I just love this movie because it's very DIY. And it's not really political. There's no subtext about society or anything, but just people getting together and doing something cool. And you just wonder what they're going to do next, right? And it breaks all these
Yeah.
social and like political, because Koreans weren't cool in Japan yet. All these things, right? It's just really interesting and fun and hopeful.
Well, I wanted to also ask you about the Blue Hearts.
Yeah,
Because I was not familiar with them, but they're a massive band.
yeah. We never interviewed them for Giant Robot or anything. Like this is kind of how I found out about them too.
Okay.
Um, and then of course, I became obsessed, and I got like the box set, and then when I was able to go to Japan with the Linda Lindas, I bought some really expensive records and 7 inches from the new band, Cro-Magnums.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, it's just I can tell you that song Linda Linda. You know how so at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, it's a hit. Kids
Yes.
go crazy. Um, it's like that for real when the Linda Lindas play it. Like everyone is really polite during most of the set, but when they play that song, like people are crowd surfing, they're jumping over the edge, jumping over the barrier, they're going nuts, screaming and jumping up and down. It's like it's incredible. I gotta say, like we knew it was a cool song. They named the band after it and stuff, but 100% in Japan, this crowds go ape shit when they played that. It was very cool. Like they love the other songs, but that one when they play it, it's I'm trying to think what you could compare it to. It's not their Louie Louie. Is it their Rise Above? I don't know. There's that great scene where they're going through cassettes trying to figure out what to cover.
Yes.
And then they come across this unmarked tape that has Linda Linda on it. And they just start singing and pogoing, and one of them is like even like a little mini slam pit kind of. Um and yeah, it had that reaction in real life when I saw that song being played.
What's the scene like in Japan right now?
There's I mean, you go to Disc Union and there's like a whole store just punk CDs and records. Um, Actually, when the Linda Lindas played there, they went to something called Punk Spring. It's a 2-day fest. The Damned played, and the Vandals and Suicidal Tendencies.
Oh my
Um,
God.
in, in addition to High Standard. Um, But yeah, so it was this huge 2-day fest that the Lindas got to play. Um, all punk, it was great. It was incredible. And then they played a couple of club shows also. And in Tokyo, we actually went to this place called the Pit Bar, which is like a little basement all ages club about the size of my living room. And bricks on either side. They have Cokes for sale. Like, and it's just like 3 bands, like with the ceiling, you could touch the ceiling, and just hardcore bands. It was so great. And one of them, was probably, in their 50s. Another band was in their 20s. Another band had, a singer who was female. It was like cool. And it was like just hardcore lifers, so it goes from DIY all the way to, the fest where No Effects and Sum 41 are headlining.
Sure.
Um, but yeah. Oh, and then we went to Osaka, and Naoko from Shonen Knife was there. So we hung out with
Oh
her in
my
Osaka.
God. It's so
So
cool.
I just love, and there's this band called The Smog from Osaka that we saw. They played Goner Fest, and we caught them in LA, so we kind of became friends with them too. So I just love that there's a scene, um, you know, of like DIY, just small bands eking it out, playing punk songs.
It's amazing. I talk to so many people who are our age who don't believe that that exists anymore. And I'm like, are you kidding? There's more
Oh,
hungry bands sleeping on couches, eating horrible tour food
yeah.
than ever, and just putting out their own vinyl 7-inch and trying to figure it out.
And in Japan, they dress cooler too. They do
Yes.
all that, and then they look way punker than us. Like we just put on a t-shirt and shorts and we're like, okay, I'm punk rock. But no, they're like out there in the wild, with looking like one of the Exploited or something. It's
Right.
like it's serious. And then did you see Guitar Wolf when they came through town? Still
I
great.
did. One of the films coming up on the show is Wild Zero.
Oh man, I
And so I
can't
was
wait for
so
that.
excited somebody picked that. Again, I had that film in the store before I could even see Guitar Wolf in person. I'd hear about them playing New York or Memphis or whatever, but just wasn't coming through as much. So it was incredible to find out that they're trying to make Wild Zero 2, but they did not get enough funding on their Kickstarter to get it
Yeah.
made. Again, another scene I had to find out all about because it's just a massive garage rock rockabilly scene going on there too.
Oh, we had so many like garage rock and surf bands coming through Jabberjaw. Like we were really lucky. Hey, but did you notice the Guitar Wolf poster in the high school music room?
I didn't.
Yeah, so there's a Guitar Wolf poster, and then there's like a Led Zeppelin one, of course. But then there's
Okay.
that Beat Happening one that's wrapped around a post. Did you know?
I did see the Beat Happening one.
Yeah, and there's a Sonic Youth one on another wall. So it's like all these things, like, man, that's Japan.
The band throughout the film, they're struggling to learn their stuff and then they get kind of good, but then they get overexhausted and they get uninspired.
I
And
think it's a 3-day span, right?
yeah, and they're losing their practice space and they're having to like go meet an ex-boyfriend who has a space, but it all kind of culminates before their last performance. They pass out
Yeah,
in the practice studio. Kai has this dream sequence, but at first you don't know it's a dream. She just kind of shows up, and her ex boyfriend, who's like an engineer and has all these guitars, is there, and he's got a present for her, and the rest of the band are like, hey, and they have sparklers, and the mom comes out from behind an amp with like a cake, congratulations, and he's like, I got you this. You said your hands were so small, try them on. And she opens it up, and it's like a big, realistic hand. And you're like, okay, what's going on? Because, I didn't know this was a dream sequence part. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, it's just they're going to borrow equipment or something. And then she keeps going on, and they're playing at Buddha. They walk onto the stage at Budokan because they're supposed to be playing there all of a sudden. And she sees the Ramones in the audience. I just love the stand-ins they have for the Ramones back there. They kind of look like them, but when I paused it, I was like, okay, I don't remember the Ramones being that beefy, but It's really the dream logic in it is really killer. I love that scene.
That movie has everything. That's all I can say. If you haven't seen it yet, you got to see this movie. And I mean, don't see it when you're hungry or sleepy because it's not fast. Make sure don't watch on your phone because you'll need the subtitles probably if you're like me.
Yeah, and I'll put a link to where I found the film online with subtitles so that people can watch it. It was so cool to see something that, again, really captured your first band experience and also the excitement of, and you probably saw this with the Linda Lindas, when the band starts getting kind of good. It's such a cool little thing where when you're in a band, all of a sudden you're like, that song that we wrote is actually kind of good. It's just really a
Right.
cool experience. And I feel like they do a really fantastic job of just the surprise of just surprising yourself when you're so young that like, oh, I found something I'm good at.
Yeah, because Sun is singing phonetically. And then Kay, like she usually plays keyboard, right? So
Yes.
she's learning guitar. She had to borrow it from her friend who had the busted hand. And yeah, it's just really cool seeing all that come together. Man, it's so good. It just makes me so happy this
And
movie.
yeah, I went down a rabbit hole. I saw performances by the actors performing the songs live and
Oh,
in front of an audience.
yeah.
And then I had to listen to the soundtrack. It is a really weird thing because it's like a fake band that's covering a real band, and the actors are actually singing and playing on it. It's just it's got a really great story and heart to it.
Oh,
So
yeah, and we didn't even mention that the drummer was in Battle Royale,
right,
right? That's cool.
yeah,
Also, yeah, and the bass player is in a real band. Like that's the next thing to go on the rabbit hole.
Baseball Bear, which
Yeah,
I was like, that's a cool name. And then James Ehaw, yeah, and then you got
yeah.
James Ehaw, who I didn't know had ever done like soundtrack work.
There's just a lot of cool elements to
Yeah,
this. To this meal. It's got a little bit, it's got your sweet part, your savory part, your salty thing. It's like it's got the whole package. Yeah, no, this movie really reminds me of a time, when I would be reviewing, movies from Asia and indie movies and action movies and stuff. But also just I remember going up to like San Francisco where like Adam from Jawbreaker had his video store last weekend,
yes,
and Lance would be there hanging out. Lance from J Church, and we just go up there and talk about Asian movies and punk rock, and just we just eat a burrito and talk about this stuff, and it really takes me back to that time. This really cool moment, for me when I was just so into everything, whether it was music or movie or food and friends and just this whole scene. So just on a personal level, this movie just really takes me back.
yeah. The video store. I talked to him briefly at one point about owning that store and closing it, and just how much we miss it. It was like being a bartender. Like
Yeah,
people would come in, the amount of things people would overshare with me because they just seen me three
yeah,
times a week for 18 years. I knew so much about people's lives, and then we would just get to talking about movies, which was so fun. And I just always loved, there were things you just never thought you'd see the light of day. You just heard about, and then all of a sudden it would show up. You just find a magical way of it existing. And weird, gray market bootleg things, and just sometimes you're just on a search. But you know, along with going to shows, I always really liked, even when I didn't have a video store, I just loved meeting the people that were, running the place or just trying to turn you on to different things.
yeah. It's just like it's funny, like you running that store, you're privy to this information about all the movies they check out. It's kind of like looking at their record collection or something, but
Yes,
maybe even deeper, because you see all the guilty pleasures.
Korean film was really a later addition to most people's scope of films. And then it was just all of a sudden one of the biggest sections in the store. All of a sudden it was just everyone was just re-releasing and putting out stuff, and it was like
Yeah.
incredible.
Well, the funny thing is now that stuff we were into, Kim Ki-duk, Park Chan-wook, Bong Joon-ho, that is like so small
Yes.
compared to Korean culture, and K-dramas and,
Yeah, you're
that's
just like,
nothing.
oh, these 4 directors are just doing they're running the scene, and then you're like, nope, it's way
Yeah.
mass. It's a massive
Yeah.
scene.
Yeah. It was really exciting to see all those waves of cinema and music and art and just to be there to help document all that stuff and just share.
Well, at the end of every episode, I ask the same question, but I tailor it depending on what we're talking about. So, on a scale from 1 to 10, how many hours of a band's first glorious, messy, horrible practice do you give this film, Linda?
I give it 11 out of 10. This is the perfect movie.
I have that here too. I have 11 hours. That is absolutely correct.
Yeah, this is a rock and roll movie, just as much as Spinal Tap, just as much as Song Remains the Same. Repo Man, it's there. It's in the pantheon, and more people need to see it. Yeah, Decline, Suburbia, all of them. It's in there.
I totally agree. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. It's so good to see you, Martin.
Yeah, let's hang out again.
Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday on your favorite podcast app and additional bonus episodes every Sunday on our Patreon. The show is a completely independent affair, so the best way to support the show is through our Patreon at patreon.com/revolutionspermovie, where you can get weekly bonus episodes and shows, exclusive limited edition flexi discs and records and CDs featuring guests that have appeared on the show, and other exclusive goods sent to you just for joining. You can follow us on social media at Revolutions Per Movie and also find out more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye!